Yeah, guys, how you guys doing?
I'm amazing. How are y'all doing?
We are all right. It's 4 a.m. in the morning where we are.
Oh, oh,
Bright
I
and early.
appreciate your time.
No, no stress. You know what I love so much about the how you guys doing is as though we didn't do all of that for 10 minutes before we started the actual recording. People love to change up, such even his voice change. How you guys doing?
How you
That's not
guys
how he
doing?
talks, but anyway,
I
it's all
love
good. It's
it.
all
I love it. I
You
love
know, people are
it.
listening now, I've got my employer voice.
No, it's okay.
It makes it fun. I'm here to have a good time. So, and learn and share. So,
So
100%.
we are with Dr. Wade, Dr. Ashley Wade. We met on Instagram through a mutual friend. Well, now a mutual friend. And I reached out because I wanted to talk to you. I saw that you were reading a similar author that we read for our book club this month.
beautiful.
This is Walter Rodney, not Rudney. I said Rudney in our previous podcast. Walter Rodney, and yeah, I was excited to reach out and just kind of dive into your mind. Why are you even reading such a book, Ashley?
Um, it's a great space to be in mentally when you can tap into that awareness. So I was led to his books by our mutual friend. She had a stack of his books, and I was like, you know what? It's probably time to explore on an international level. I didn't really know what I was going to be getting into. I wasn't very familiar with Walter Rodney. So as I started reading and got into his story in one of his books that I read, I just became so excited about his life, and just being
100%.
able to learn about him and apply principles and share that also with people was a great time. I learned a lot, and I was able to grasp a lot from the book.
100%. Can you tell everyone where you are joining us from?
Hi, listen, look at me taking off too fast.
No, that
Like
was
Miles
my
said, like
question,
we're
so it's all right.
okay. My name is Dr. Ashley Wade. I am in the US and I'm in Dallas, Texas. So shout out to Texas. Shout out to the United States. We're over here trying to make it.
You
There's
wanna,
lots of chaos right now in the United States. So
do you want to know an interesting fact about Texas?
please do tell.
I think your population for the state of Texas is almost the population of our entire country.
Wow.
So that's just to put things into perspective. And not to get into it too quickly, but that's part of our colonial heritage, right? It's the fact that what we call a country is basically the size of a state in the US. We'll,
Wow.
we'll get to talking about some of what Walter stood for. He's a Pan-Africanist, of course, and part of the Pan-African ideology is advocating for a United States of Africa. So, you know how people always say Africa is not a country, we're a diverse nation of people. Politically, it would make more sense if Africa was a country, because then we'd
Hmm.
be competing on a global level when it comes to the
Mm-hmm.
negotiation of resources
Mm-hmm.
and business dealings. So that's an interesting fact about Texas. Um,
Wow.
Mind blowing, hey?
Yes, it is. Because I mean, it is a big state, it's heavily populated, and that caught me by surprise because of course my context of being here and never, really seeing anything on to be able to compare it to like that.
Right. Have you ever interacted with somebody from South Africa or Africa in general?
No, no,
Actually,
no,
then we'll
I have
take it
not.
for granted. We'll take it for granted. So this is our first crossover, I guess.
I'm
So
excited about it.
I'll tell you. I mean, I have facts that I thought would be interesting for you to know about South Africa. But do you have any perceptions? Just have you heard
I
anything?
um I'm not sure. It's all conceptual. It's
Yeah.
all very recent. Like the whole idea of Pan-Africanism is fairly recent in my studies. And so right now I'm excited. Like you showed me your altar and I was like, wow. I mean, I was happy, of course, to see the crystals and a lot of similarities that way as far as,
Yeah.
points of interest. but I'm still on a beginner level as far as learning and putting together our cultures.
Yeah.
If that makes
How big is your conscious community that side, your particular community?
my
Can you give us an
particular
idea of what
community.
your life is like socially with your
It is
friends?
very interactive. So I spend a lot of time on Instagram, sharing books. So I share books that I read. I also engage with the community with my books.
Mm,
So there are a lot of shops that people set up. They call them like pop-up shops. So different places around town, they may be important to the city, it may be historical. But I like to interact with, of course, other Black people and share on this level of understanding because not a lot of people read.
yeah. Yeah.
So
Is it,
instead of, in my philosophy, what I've learned is instead of saying, hey, I read this wonderful book, I've decided to like share it on Instagram and then bring books to people where they it may pique their interest. And so they may grab it and they don't even know what they're grabbing. It may be a
yeah.
book about Walter Rodney and they're like, because it's at this shop and it's not at the traditional bookstores. So I
Yeah.
do engage very heavily with the community inside. I hate to say inside the community, but I'm pretty active. I
Yeah.
like to connect with people. And what I found is, of course, on the self-discovery journey, and when you start to look for the journey of self and purpose and stuff like that,
Yeah.
culture collides right into that. And so I try to mesh the two, the concept of knowledge of self and reading and exploration to people here in the country.
That's really interesting. I mean, what's the turnout like for these pop-up shops, you know? And is the attraction other things that are happening at the shop? And then
Yes. So
okay.
it's different vendors. So I wouldn't mind name dropping. There's this one in
Yeah.
particular that I'm very passionate about. It's called Sunny South Dallas Food Park. So it is we have fairs, and so there's a lot of course racial history in the United States. And there was a time around like the 50s, going into history a little bit, around the 40s and 50s, where of course Black people couldn't go to the fair besides like one day a year.
And is this
And
the
so
1500s or
this is
1950?
this is like 1950s.
1950.
Mhm. And so there was a lot of like chaos around that time in this central area around Fair Park. So that was in the 50s. So fast forward to today, of course, a lot has changed, but it's basically a place for commerce. There are food trucks. It's basically an opportunity for entrepreneurs or business owners to sell their product. So
Mm,
there's a pretty big market. There may be like 300 to 500 people that cross the path throughout the time frame of 4 hours. And so you get to meet a lot of different people that way. I love to engage in conversations, kind of like what we're having in
yeah.
public. So to give people an opportunity to talk,
Yeah.
because we really don't share. And that kind of is what solidified this book. This is the book that I read by Walter Rodney called The Groundings with My Brothers. And it just kind of like validated that. Like we need to talk to each other, we need to engage, we
Yeah.
need to share. If we have knowledge, we need to share it. If we're learning something, we need to share it with each other as adults because a lot of people don't have that concept of like learning as an adult. They think, oh, I'm done with high school or college and I'm done learning. Like,
Yeah.
no. So I just
Do you
encourage that
feel
dialogue.
so I just want to ask, do you feel oh flip, I'm mute. Am I mute? No, I'm not
No,
muted,
you're
sorry.
right.
Okay, cool. So do you feel that that learning challenge, particularly with an adult, is particularly prevalent within the Black community? And if so, what do you think drives that challenge?
Um,
That's a good
Definitely
question.
it is a challenge. Literacy in the Black community. It's changing. I've connected with hundreds of people or thousands of people who are interested in learning. Even if they don't read themselves, they kind of follow, I guess, Instagram followers, is that if that's what you call it. But people's interests are piqued. And that's what we have to do as adults because we're of the conditioning and indoctrination. We think, oh, if I'm done with school, then I'm done like learning. So
Yeah.
no, I'm not gonna read a book, or no, I'll watch a movie, or if it's something on TV, I'll do that. Documentaries, maybe. But as far as like sitting and like reading, people just don't, they have their excuses. I don't have time, Or how do I know if I'm going to be interested? And so those type of barriers, those are just basic barriers. Also, maybe probably the literacy rate, because of all the systemic drama that goes on in the education system, people unfortunately fall short. And so
Yeah.
there are a lot of people that may want to read, but they're intimidated by, what if I get the book and I can't, I can only read so much and I get discouraged. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of, points of contact where it's discouraged. And so, that's what I try to implement back into the community. Like, hey, these are really good books. So when people see it at these spaces where they are shopping, they may want to grab it, something that they would never, have voluntarily seen if it wasn't for the space.
I have a question, because I'm drawing the parallels. We share a lot of similarities in our history, that being the US and South Africa. When you make an observation, would you say that people of color are behind in their self-development? Basically, would you say other communities are better at things like reading, at communing, I guess, around more positive, activities, like simple things like budgeting, personal budgets? Would you say that culturally we're still lacking something? Because that's
Yeah,
definitely the case in South Africa.
yeah, I agree with you. I'm same here. We are just now figuring out that there's like more to the story as far as slavery is concerned.
Yeah.
Believe it or not. We're just recently, like, in order to learn certain things here or even be introduced to Pan-Africanism, we have to go to certain leaders like Malcolm X. We
Yeah.
have to go to certain leaders to even know that there's more to the story.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, we're just now here in this generation learning about internationalism and tapping into those type of stories. I'm sure I'm not the only one. I'm sure you may find another person that's way deep into,
Yeah.
that Pan-Africanism, but it's really something that people are like just now becoming open to in this generation, because we're just learning that we should be paying attention to that.
Yeah. And I know we're going to talk about the book. That's a big part of this interview, but the context is so important. Where do you guys look to, or where do you specifically look to for inspiration when it
Oh,
comes to
damn.
learning more about Pan-Africanism?
Sorry. Do you wanna repeat your question? Like, you cut for 1 second there.
All right. Am I clear now?
Yeah.
So where do you look to for inspiration for Pan-Africanism? Is it books? Are they specific people that are like
There's
basically?
actually a place. So in Dallas, Texas, there's a bookstore. It's called the Pan African Connection Bookstore and Resource Center. And it is located in South Dallas. It's owned by a Black woman. It was well, she is a widow. Yes, she's a widow. She lost her husband, but so I didn't get a chance to meet him, but was a big staple in the community. The bookstore is a big staple in the community. So they have books. They have it's a place where we can come and watch documentaries. And on Sundays, they have an African drum circle. They also do events like ancestral healing events. So we get a chance to learn. There's not a lot of places like that in the States. Maybe here and there you'll find them sporadic, but we're very fortunate in Dallas to have a place like this that we can go, because again, the cultures are similar, but a lot of people don't connect the other side, our similarities. They don't connect our stories, our struggle. We really don't even study international heroes.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. Tell me, I would love to know more about how you guys study there, so I can see like if there are differences or similarities, because here it's not very common to even have like discussions about Pan-Africanism. It kind of stopped or slowed down after the 60s or after the revolutionaries of that time, the civil rights era. Once they were basically killed off, the conversation subsided about Pan-Africanism.
Yeah.
Mm.
Okay. So Miles, do you want to say something? Can I take it?
Yeah. I guess we can take turns. I can start. So I'll speak more from a like a primary and secondary educational level. So these are the things that we learned when we were in primary school and high school, and a lot of that actually is centered around American and European history, which is funny because a lot of the book you guys read, I didn't actually get a chance to read the book,
Yeah.
but the book is called How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. And it's crazy to see that our education system is one of those very fundamental ways in which we were underdeveloped, because a lot of what we learn is centered around events that,
Eurocentric.
while they did affect us directly, then they have very little direct relation to our actual history as Africans. And most of the history that is taught to us is usually taught to us through the lens of pain. Now, as a child, these types of things might go over your head, but I think in very nuanced and subtle ways, they start to shape the way that you think. They start to shape the way that you perceive your importance within the timeline of history and events. And therefore, you become very limited in the way that you actually end up, exploring your I wouldn't just say roots, but also just like your place in society.
Absolutely.
Because you're so disenfranchised and everything you've been taught about your history comes from the perception of somebody who isn't even of your skin color. You get taught what your role was in history, but it isn't taught through the lens of somebody who was your skin color. This gets particularly more difficult in high schools where, at least in South Africa, majority of those teachers were white, and it becomes very difficult to then ask questions or even just explore the ways in which it affected our community, because the people teaching it might not necessarily be connected to those feelings, not through any fault of their own, just by virtue of them not being directly connected to it. And that becomes a very difficult conversation to navigate. So there's a lot of effects. That's just I guess a start to the conversation, many of which are nuancing. You only really start to realize how it affects you once you start entering the I guess the broader community, where you start to see how real and systematic racism and all of these different challenges are. So yeah.
100%. It's crazy. The parallel is insane. I would imagine that there would be more teachings. Like I would imagine that there would still be stories passed, or still be, silos of places where there may be traditional things, because here we look forward to connecting with that. There are a lot of people who don't, again, consider our connection here, but the people that do eat it up. Like we want to connect with it in a way where we can both be channeling the same things. Like once you learn about it and you start exploring, of course, different leaders, their stories, and even, like, of course, to your point, history past the pain, you get all these powerful feelings, you get powerful knowledge, you actually get more powerful as a person in your psyche. And it's amazing to me how detrimental it is when you don't learn about yourself and you don't learn to connect. And you only learn through the lens of the European story. So it is detrimental to us because we don't connect. And so when we don't connect, then we miss out on all, like, the great things that make us unique. But again, promoting the capitalism, imperialistic mindset.
No,
No, that's true. Sorry to interrupt you, Mustafa. That's true. And I think you mentioned something important, which is you don't get to connect with self, and I guess with history. And I think the problem right now is a lot of the connections that we do have are all pain oriented, so that's the only connection to history you really have. Whenever we talk about history, there isn't really much. And I think I'm also guilty of this myself. I myself am not particularly aware of the more holistic experience that I guess our predecessors went through. I know that a lot of it is suffering, and it is slavery based, but I can imagine that there are other aspects to that history that are not told. And as a result of that, you don't have any way of connecting to that. So your somewhat ancestral passing of being a Black person or a person of color is suffering, and that ends up becoming how you externalize and relate to the world through this lens of suffering, because that's what you've been taught. That's what you've been taught where you come from. It's even deeper when that's been 400 years of that. And now you're trying to navigate your space within a world that doesn't necessarily recognize the same level of suffering, but that's where you've been told as a Black child that's where you come from. So yeah, it's a problem.
It
It's a
is.
problem.
And even quickly just respond before we move on, even on a medical level, I'm working in the pharmacy. I see people taking pills. There's a whole demand for that. Like, it's huge. You wouldn't imagine how many billions of dollars people make from depression, or these companies, and like the capitalism is major, and it puts two and two together, because if I can keep you down and you relate only to depression, guess what? I get to make money off of you as well. And I think that's something that we have to keep in mind as healthcare practitioners. Maybe I don't know, maybe we can segue into that, but that's one thing that you'll want to keep in mind. That's something that I've found a passion for, having empathy for our people because of the programming. We're inherently depressed, we're inherently in poverty, we're inherently in a mindset of like lowness, and it's not fair, but the two have to match. When people want healing, or they want to self-discover, you have to learn about culture. Like, it comes, it's part of the territory. You have to read.
Yeah.
And so if you read, like if you start to find yourself and heal through therapy, those avenues, and you read, I feel like that's when you can connect with your power self and,
100%.
really be who you're supposed to be.
I mean, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. And I think it's just powerful, that healing comes with, it can't be holistic unless it's on every level of your body, right?
Wonderful statement.
Your mental, your spiritual body, it's part of that. And a big part of that is knowing who you are and where you come from. So we'll do this because we've just lost Miles and we are running out of time anyway. Well, we can come back for that part too, right?
Okay, sure.
We left off the previous meeting speaking about just the education system and our educational experiences. You wanted to know more about what's happening this side. And I really wanted to speak on this, Miles, because I think between the two of us, between me and Miles, I'm the radical one here, right? So definitely, I'm the radical one. I think, and that has given me a very unique perspective of our education system from a very young age. I've spoken on this from a very young age, and it got me in trouble at school.
Oh my goodness.
Quite a bit, right? So throughout high school, I started noticing that there's something missing from my education system. We went to what we call private schools in South Africa. So these are schools that are privately owned. They're not, the government is kind of not involved to a certain degree. And so most of our teachers were white, right? Now, part of the big fight, right? If you look at the student protest movements in South Africa, part of the demands is having a decolonized education, because our education is very Eurocentric, right? Very, very, very. In history class, I know things about Christopher Columbus. I know stuff about, there's a Dutch man named Jan van Riebeeck, right? Who I think he was part of the Dutch settlers that arrived in Cape Town to colonize.
Mhm.
South Africa, Vasco da Gama. These are Dutch, more Dutch people. I know a lot. And I remember doing a section in history on Egypt, but the lack of clarity. Till this day, I don't even know. They never even made mention to the race of those people in Egypt. And in our class, we kind of just skipped over it. It was kind of like, hey, there was this civilization. It's called Egypt. These slaves built these stone structures, and that was it. That was the end of it. They kind of showed us how they might have quarried the stones or pulled them to build the structures. That was it. There was no mention of the culture. There was no mention of the innovation. The writing, right? What some of those texts were saying, even, right? Because ever since we discovered the Rosetta Stone, now we're able to decipher Egyptian hieroglyph. So no mention of that at all, about what those texts could have been saying, what was the thinking of those people. We literally skipped past that chapter in Egypt, and then the rest was in detail, right? So that was history class, taught by a white person, of course.
And that was in high school.
That was in
That's
high
your
school.
Yeah. Yeah.
wow. Okay.
That was in high school. So I want to. It's deep. The colonial mindset is deep. For example, each one of us. I told you my name is Masiko, right?
Mhm.
But each one of us have what we call a white name or a Christian name that is on our ID, right? It's on our identity document. So my second name is Christopher.
What up, Columbus?
Hi. Hi. All right.
Wow.
And this is very common for people in South Africa and Africa alike. Miles is actually
I
from
mean, Nigeria, and I mean, like,
yeah,
yeah, I literally introduced myself by my white
by
name.
his Christian
Um,
name.
and it's for that, and I told you why. For the people who didn't hear it, it's a lot of people having butchered my first name being Okechukwu in primary school. And as I told her, the last straw for me was when somebody called me Pikachu, and I'm like, well, we're not doing that. We're definitely not doing that throughout my lifetime.
That's gonna die
I
soon.
don't have an no, like I don't have an ash, bro. Like I can't go like
Like, give
that.
me a break. It's crazy to me.
Jeez.
So
So yeah.
they don't practice, like they don't care that about yourselves. Like it's different to me, like if they don't, as far as like the teaching goes, but they should care. Like you would imagine, this is just my imagination, that they would, even though they're teaching you indoctrination, they would still be respectful, at least of your name. Like, give me a break.
Oh, the name was heavily African names were heavily disrespected. In fact,
Mm.
it's like you don't even have the pride to want to protest for your name. There's an advantage to going by the white name, right? So we advocate for that. It's very bad. Down to just the other year, there's this lady on Instagram. I think you'll like her. Her name is Zuleika Patel. I'll send you her
Okay.
profile. But she got famous in South Africa because she started to refuse to cut her hair. Was she in high school, Miles, or primary? But she's a high school student. Zuleika Patel. I'll share with you. The story.
Okay.
But she rose to national fame just because the teachers, there were like all these double standards. For example, in my school, boys had to be clean shaven, right? It was part of the code of conduct of the school. But white people, the white boys would walk around with their flowing hair, right?
Mm-hmm.
And your hair had to be shaven, right? You'd get in trouble if you had bits of your own hair.
Dreadlocks or like any of those things going on. Yeah.
Exactly. Our education system does nothing to teach us about who we are beyond. I'll give you an example. So there's a civilization. I'm from a province, right? We call a province. What you call a state, we call a province.
Okay.
Right? Even though the state is the size of our country. But essentially a province is a similar idea to what a state would be. It's a unit of the country, right? I'm from a province called Limpopo, right?
Yeah, that tells me you've been colonized. Limpopo,
Limpopo.
Limpopo. I don't think Limpopians would be very happy with you saying
If they heard me
Limpopo.
say it that way, look,
Yo, you'd be butchered, bro.
fully,
Alive.
100%. So, and in my province, there's a town, an area called Mapungubwe, right? Now, this place, there was a gold rhino. It's now, I think it's now in the British Museum. There was a gold rhino that was found there. And the reason why that was so revolutionary is because it showed signs of that means the people there had to have sophisticated gold or have some sort of mining process to extract gold, right? And this is a anomaly when it comes to studying South African history, or at least the version that we've been taught, because we are taught in 1652 when Jan van Riebeeck arrived in the Cape. He only found hunter-gatherer tribes called the Khoisan. That's the official version of history that we're getting. That the Dutch settlers came, they arrived on the Cape, and they saw these basically unevolved hunter-gatherer nomadic tribes called the Khoisan.
Mm-hmm.
And they would then use that version of history to claim all the land in South Africa. So in South Africa, white people own north of 80% of the land, but they are, I think, 10% of the population, if I'm not mistaken.
Same thing with the wealth. Same thing with the wealth.
Same thing with the wealth. I might be getting the exact numbers wrong, but the idea is that in South Africa, a minority of people own the majority of the land. They dispossessed us because the narrative is when they came here, nobody has inhabiting this land, right? Except the Khoisan, that they concede to. But they try to give this version of history that they lay claim to this land because they discovered it.
Is that not the funniest thing you have ever heard in your entire life?
It's
Like, even now that we reflect on it, it's like, you taught us this foolery. Like, we believed it. You taught it. You had teachers to teach it. It's in your book. We really, at that point, we really don't know to look at other resources, or if we do, it's a fiction model.
Yeah.
Not like, we're not encouraged to study beyond what we're taught in school. As children, we're ready to go do our own thing. There's no excitement about studying. And so, like, now I feel that I have an excitement for studying because there's so much. I'm blown away. I'm not surprised, but I am stuck in a wow state because of the audacity. Like,
yeah,
it's one thing to tell us about Christopher Columbus. Okay, yeah, you brought us here. We're here now. You basically can control what we learn. But like, the audacity to, like, I guess the correct word would be infiltrate a country and then twist and warp the history
100%.
to make it believe something, to make it, teach something completely different. People believe this stuff. We believe it. And I think what really boggles my mind is that white people literally believe it. They won't fact check. They don't care. It's their story. They're the winners. So
100%.
they don't care to, connect you with the truth. I think that's the problem. It's like, yeah, it's history. It's our history. But can we let the truth be the truth? Like, when are we going to do that? And especially under this religious headstone, we're indoctrinated as well with Christianity, that we're born into that.
Yeah.
Our ancestors here, or our elders here, church and Christianity, I hate to get into the religion, sometimes that's a sticky topic, but you don't really have a lot of choice.
Yeah.
And even now, as an adult, like, as you grow out of that, it's shunned upon. It's weird. There's not a lot of people who are really open-minded in that way because we get stuck and there's shame. If you think a different way, or if you think about another religion or spirituality, then it's wrong automatically. It's so crazy just the level of indoctrination on both sides, the Black people here and the white people, because they believe it, Christopher and, you know, all their heroes, they completely believe in.
Yeah, no, 100%. And it really, I mean, it really goes far, because I need you to imagine what it's like for Africans living in Africa and have no connection. How did we save our own connection to African culture? I look at Americans now and their conscious movement, and they are, they have this urge, right, to connect back with who they are. For Africans, I think the things that we inherited as culture, we kind of don't appreciate. Right? So we have certain things that we're still connected to a lot of our cultures, but we're very confused about it. And it seems like the colonial project, when successful, does a great job from removing you from that. So all the educated Africans do not connect with their culture, and they don't connect with the wisdom of their culture. I'm going to share a few examples now. So it's really deep. I had to, in high school, I was an outlier. In fact, I learned about myself. This is how far I had to go. It was a full circle thing for me. For me to even respect my history and who I am as a person, I had to learn about myself from the radical movements in the US, right? So I started first, I ran into a documentary called Zeitgeist. That was a big turning. I was 17. That was a big turning point for me. A Zeitgeist by Peter Joseph, right? Who's a socialist from Russia. He's a white guy. So Peter Joseph's Zeitgeist, everything changes. All of a sudden, I realized there's more to the story about religion. There's more to the story about economics. If they've lied about that, what else, right?
Exactly.
As I went on to the journey, really where I started to get it, and I didn't even make the connection at first, but as I was moving into learning about my spirituality, I did not know that the things that I was learning about were African spirituality. I couldn't even make the connection. So I started listening. Of course, then you run into your hidden colors. There was another turning point, right? So you learn about the Pan-Africanist, that side, at least your Dr. Umar's, your Dr. Umar Johnson's, and then you then get really into the rabbit hole. So then you run into your metaphysicians, your Dr. Phil Valentine, your who else? Bobby Hemmett, right? Bobby Hemmett was a big one that side. Dr. Who's this guy now? I must not forget. Okay, I'm forgetting some of these names because it's been a while. But then you're now in the rabbit hole, but it doesn't click that this is the same thing they're talking about is your mystic traditions that are right in front of you. And I live in South Africa, right? The connection didn't happen until one day. I think then you run into the likes of your Credo Mutwa. There's a shaman, an African shaman. He's known as a Sanusi, which is a keeper of African history, keeper of tribal history. His name is Credo Mutwa. You run into him, and you know, I think it was David Icke. He flew all the way to South Africa to come interview this guy. Long interviews online to try to figure out about him. And then you start making the connections. And here are some of those philosophical connections. It's always been right there in front of us. So, for example, one of the languages in South Africa is called Zulu. That's the most popular. When you hear about South Africa, you hear about the Zulu language.
Yes.
Now, Zulu translates to heavens. So the Zulu people are people from the heavens, right? That's you're starting to see some of our philosophy come into play, right? Heaven is called Ezulweni. And then you have the Zulu people, right? In my language, I'm from a tribe called the Bedi tribe, right? And in my language, the word for God, right? What we call God is Mudimo, M-I-M-O, sorry, M-O-D-I-M-O, Mudimo, right? That's the word for God. And now, but the word for, get this now, the word for your parents who have passed on, what we'd call ancestor, is Badimo. Right? So the prefix MO just means singular, and then the prefix BA just means plural. So essentially, God and gods, right? Our ancestors are gods. That's the philosophy embedded into my language. right? That gets lost in translation then when you get into Christianity, because in Christianity there's God and then there's angels. There's a clear phonetic difference, but there's a phonetic connection in my language about God and our ancestors that pass away, or us as human beings, as conscious beings having this experience. That's in the language. It's not even a conceptual thing. It's how we saw life. More things, interesting things to know about South Africa. I'm just going to throw some facts at you, and then I promise you, then I'm going to ask you questions about the book.
Fantastic.
Right?
I feel
We
like
need
I
long
need to know.
conversations.
Like
Okay.
I'm in a
So a couple more facts. There's a place in South Africa. It's another province, right, which is like a state, called Mpumalanga, right? And that just means where the sun rises. And in this place, we have the oldest calendar known to man. So the oldest calendar in history is in South Africa, in all of the world, right? And it's a stellar calendar. So it maps out, it's aligned with star constellations. It's called Adam's, white people call it Adam's calendar. Right? You can research this. Adam's calendar. Adam, of course, referring back to the first man. Yeah. So this being the first calendar. And it's a big stone structure that looks kind of like Stonehenge, right? You'll start to see that masonry plays, or stonework is a big part of our culture, right? So all the way up to Egypt. So that's Adam's calendar. It's aligned with Orion's belt. It's aligned with the solstices and the equinoxes, and all that jazz. You can look it up and see how that structure has been built. It's on the same longitude line, I think. I'm forgetting whether it's on longitude and latitude with the pyramids and the, excuse me, and some stone structures in Zimbabwe, which is a province north of us here in Limpopo, right?
Zimbabwe.
Yeah, Zimbabwe.
Province or country?
Sorry, country. Wow. Excuse me. Excuse me, Mouse.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
I didn't even know. I'm just like
You're still with it. You're writing it all down. And Credo Mutua describes our connection, right? People living in South Africa right now, we have a strong connection to Egypt. Some of the beadwork, we're the same people. Credo points out that we're the same people that eventually made up the civilizations of Kemet, right? We were migrating up and down this country, this continent, and European history makes it seem like we were not mobile. These stories now that we transgressed the Americas before. As you learn in Pan-Africanisms, you start to learn that Black people were navigating the Americas, and we have maps that map out the Americas before Christopher Columbus, right? So there's definitely a story that we've not been told. If we could be traveling all across the world, we were definitely traveling all across the African continent. And they are like legitimate, real connections, things that are exactly the same about our civilizations and civilizations that happen up in the north. So there's a lot that's been lost there. There's a lot of history. And Miles, I don't know, were you shocked to even hear some of this history about like some of the stone structures in our own country?
Not well.
Yeah.
I don't think it's so much shocked as it is like for me, you're a lot more like historically versed than I am. And I think that's also because you began the journey way earlier than I did. I mean, you were the rebel, I was fully teacher's pet. So like completely different trajectory for the both of us. And it's crazy that we ended up like colliding at some point in time. But I think while I was listening to you speak, the big thing that came to mind was just, isn't it crazy how when you even just talking about the oldest calendar that was being able to align with the stars, and even just the ability to align it with the stars, this was done where there's no resources. Like there's none of any of the technological advancements that we have right now. It's just probably mathematical intuition and calculations that far exceed our understanding right now. And yet we are looked at as the population of people who are the most uneducated, because we don't necessarily fit within the context of colonial language. So it's not so much that we were the uneducated ones, it's just our way of expression and communication was not the standard of communication at the time. And therefore, that's why it gets lost in translation. That's why it gets lost as a bunch of uneducated people who are clicking their way through life.
Yeah.
So it's that's what was really like scary for me as I was thinking about what you were saying. It's just the amount of, like, even when I think about Egypt, for example, to this day, people are unable to understand how they were able to create those pyramids to be as timeless as they are, as accurate as they are, to be able to have the kinds of internal design that they had while having the external design of a pyramid, sorry, without any of the resources that are available to us now. That would make that process, I guess, easier. And it's absolutely like crazy to me to think about the fact that those are the people who don't get taught about. We don't get taught about them. And sometimes I wonder, do we not get taught about it? Because if we do, then maybe they'll realize just how much potential they actually have.
Oh, can
Yeah.
I interject?
Yeah, go for it.
It's not, that is part of the story. Part of the story is we are at the potential. And I think that lesson is unfortunately to our detriment because we only see ourselves
As potential.
until you have to learn your way out. And I'm really glad that I connected with you guys. First of all, I was honored. I went on our break. I was like, oh my gosh, like this is surreal. I'm honored to be sharing space with you guys because we have to learn ourselves out of colonialism, unfortunately. And that's why reading is so important. And I'm really glad. I feel blessed. I'm really happy that the ancestors saw fit to see my being as a person to share education with people. I'm a pharmacist. I love to talk about medicine. I like my little job. But I love to help people even know that it's possible to learn your way out of colonialism. And when we do, it's not just the potential that we'll have, it's the power that we'll have. And that is what's terrifying. The mental power, you mentioned, Miles, as far as mathematical, you were saying, there's no way. I mean, we literally had to be mathematical geniuses. We had to be on some super high level
Like Einstein had nothing on us. That's what I'm saying. Like when you actually put it into context, it's like,
yes.
what?
Yeah.
Because
keeps proving itself over and over. When you read more books, the proof is there. There's more proof from the American standpoint. You guys are there, at least there's pieces that may be the same, but for us, it gives us a tad bit of hope and validation of being part of like a bigger community, a bigger purpose, a bigger, all that other good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the conversation naturally happened the way that it did, and I'm wondering if we should take it to the book.
Sure.
But yeah, this is very exciting. I think, it couldn't have gone any other way, and we needed to connect that way, especially for our first session. I foresee more sessions if this is going to be the case. We haven't even scratched the surface about.
That's what's fun. And I brought a couple of more books.
100%.
This is, sorry to interject. This is just me now saying that, unfortunately, because I have to follow the colonial calendar.
He has to go back to his master.
I have to go back to my master, man. Master's calling now. No, I'm kidding. I just need to get ready to go to the hospital and work. So yeah. I'm really honored to have been able to be part of the session for the short time that I could. As Masao was saying, hopefully we can have more of these and just further explore this, because like you said, the surface hasn't even been scratched yet. We're still dusting it off. So
that's so
there's
so much. Like again, as you go, be high. You mentioned that you are not as radical, and I know you have to go, but I just want to encourage you to be high. I hope that you flow through the hospital in highness, and you connect with your patients and other providers with highness, because that is really who we are, and that's what we eventually learn ourselves into, not just the potential of being, but the literal being. So,
Mm.
be blessed. I can't wait to reconnect with you. And even along your day, just radiate in your highness, because that is our true birthright. Be blessed.
Thank you. I
Miles
really
does have,
appreciate that. Thank you.
yeah, Miles does have to drop off, but I'm gonna stay with you to,
Okay.
yeah, I'm gonna stay with you to continue a conversation. Miles, thank you so much for coming. Yeah,
All
this
right,
was
no
brilliant.
stress. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers. Okay, let's get into it. Groundings with my brothers, right? I read obviously How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, so I'm familiar with Walter Rodney. Tell me, why did you pick up this book?
So our mutual friend Trey, I saw her post about it,
Yeah,
and she was selling a bundle. It was
it's an
Grounding with
incredible page, by the way.
yes,
Yeah,
very much so. Very, very dynamic being.
yeah.
Never met her. I've never met her, but we have communication through Instagram. But she had a book stack. I didn't know a single thing about Walter Rodney. Never heard of him unless he was mentioned in another reference.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of some leaders that we study, like Malcolm X, some leaders like Stokely Carmichael, mention Walter Rodney in
Mm-hmm.
their journeys of enlightenment. And so that was probably the only time I would even see the name, but I may not even know to remember Walter Rodney. So when I saw her stack, I was excited. Walter Rodney, there were 3 books: Groundings with my brothers, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. There was one more. I don't remember, but
Yeah.
I purchased it from her, the bundle. And the first one is kind of short, and I like to read several books at a time. So I was like, well, I'll tap into this one. And it took me to a different place. It elevated how even the way that I felt about myself, the way that I was, it elevated the education.
Yeah.
I'm really, really glad that I read it.
Okay. And so yeah, I didn't know him as well. Definitely. I found out about him through reading the book, and I should know about him. Um, I think did he get banned from Jamaica? Did you hear about
It
that?
is.
He
Yeah.
used to go into the community beyond the walls of his university to go teach the
Yes.
community about African history.
Mhm.
The book that you're reading, I think, is conversations that he had with members of the Rastafarian community.
Yes.
I
Mhm.
found that premise ridiculous, and apparently, it's a great source for our understanding of the Rastafarian culture.
Mhm.
Can you speak more on that or more to that?
Yes. Let me see how to level it. He humanizes our culture, our most radical culture, because he is Caribbean, if I'm not mistaken, Caribbean, African.
Yeah,
I
he's
don't remember his, there's some
yeah
parts I don't remember about
from
exactly, like,
Guyana.
because he traveled, from an early age. It talks about he traveled at 18, like he was a target because he was aware of history early in life. He traveled, he talked with different people, and he went to the people. That's something different in our culture. A lot of our leaders are, I think, the same as kind of like what you mentioned. They are mostly colonized, and the idea is to move up the ranks.
Mm,
And so Walter Rodney, what he brought home for me was, instead of going that direction, moving up the ranks with your intellect, move towards the people. You don't know what people need. You don't know what their life is like if you don't talk, if you don't connect. We could judge Rastafarian people and say whatever the stereotype is, but how will we know unless we go talk to them? So
yeah,
he made relationships. He understood their culture. He listened. That was another thing, a big takeaway from his book: to listen
yeah,
to people, listen to their stories, listen to their concerns, because don't go just straight in thinking, okay, I need to teach. Listen, people
yeah,
have
yeah,
their own, their culture is thriving, their culture is alive, and there's a position for it. And in his mindset is, if we went to basically teach them what we know and it's colonial, we're further colonializing people instead of listening to their story and learning, so that we can get closer to the truth and closer to humanity by grounding and being equal with each other, even if there's, some demographic difference,
yeah,
finances, education, whatever, even if with those differences, we can still ground with each other in conversation and we both grow from it.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, he was, I mean, he definitely listened. He wrote an entire book about a different culture. That's something to ponder on, actually. So I didn't think about it like that. Thank you about his style of leadership. That instead of going up the ranks, he chose more to go to the people. He suffered for that because then he was eventually bombed.
Yeah.
Um, he was car bombed, and it, he reminds me a lot of there's a radical public intellect from South Africa named Steve Biko. I don't know if you've ever heard of him.
I have not.
Oh, you're gonna love him. Oh my
Excited.
word. Oh my word. Steve Biko. So Steve, Steve
Uh-huh.
B Biko. How do you Biko? Biko?
Okay.
Right. He was also, so he during apartheid he used to uh champion the Black consciousness movement in South Africa way back when we were just not even there, right?
Mhm. Understood.
And he used to write a lot through his university. Eventually, his writings got banned,
Mhm.
and then he was later killed by the apartheid government. Please give me a
Mhm.
second.
Understood.
Excuse me. He wrote a book called "I Write What I Like," and I encourage you, when you get off this call, just Google quotes by Steve Biko just to get acquainted with some of the things that he said. Phenomenal, phenomenal. I think you're really going to. He's that guy.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you.
So Walter reminds me of that. He was killed for what he believes in, killed for fighting for his people, killed for educating his people. Steve Biko was a Pan-Africanist as well. So very interesting character. And how far are you in the book? Did you complete it?
Yes, I completed it.
Wow.
And it's one that I love to refer to. And even so on Instagram, what I do is book reviews and different interviews with people. And I use one of a quote from this book, and it's just simple, like we all have to ground. So that's what I now use. Ever since I finished the book, that is now like a quote that I use in my marketing to
Mm.
justify and to validate the fact that we need to talk to each other, whether it's through Instagram Live, whether it's person to person, even via Zoom, like we're doing. That is the whole lesson here. Even with him in the Rastafarian community, beyond that, because he continued to teach and travel, he was very well traveled. He even, I think, went to Canada. There was a
Oh, wow.
big around the same time, I think the 60s, there was a big meeting of revolutionaries in Canada. I forgot the name of the event. But he, again, just to the point of his travels
Yeah.
and talk and discussions with people. I
Yeah.
mean, we need this because if we don't discuss, we don't know. And I'm really, glad that you shared some things about your culture. Even that, even though I feel like I've kind of learned a little bit,
Yeah.
there's still so much more to learn
Yeah.
about African culture, specifically South African culture, or Egypt, different places. There's so much to learn.
100%. Um, we are on a free Zoom plan, so we do have 3 minutes
Okay.
left. And I was wondering, how do you feel? Do you feel ready for one more final session?
Sure. I have no problem with that. I'm having a lot of fun. I think 30 minutes, if you do another 30 minutes, I think that'll be a good time frame. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I'm all right. I'm good to
Okay.
go for another 30 minutes. I just would
Okay.
like to get at least an introduction to this book and to cover as much detail as we can in this session. We're
Okay.
definitely going to need more sessions, but I'm very happy with everything so far. Right, so
This has been so much fun.
yeah, we'll take another 10-minute break and reconvene for our final 30 minutes. So yeah, thank you for joining me again. I just want to lay it all on the line here. That's why I'm pushing for these extra sessions. You just never know. I'm a seize the moment type of person, so you never know. Capture
Understood.
the most amount of value that you can, and then share it with people.
Absolutely. I'm
And
with
that's
you
what
on
we're
that.
doing here. So we're still in the book. Were there any moments? What stood out the most from you in the book? Were there any moments that stood out? Any stories in particular?
I think that I wouldn't say that there were necessarily any moments in particular because to me the story just continued to unfold. Um, he mentioned Rastafarian people, but he also mentioned other places like the Caribbean and his connection to the Caribbean. He talked about his wife and family and travel and how that how his life evolved through that from a young person to an adult and relationship. I think him and his wife dated long distance for years,
Wow.
so I thought that was interesting. Um, and also, and she, Patricia Rodney, his wife, is a dynamic person. If you haven't researched her, definitely do that. She has a Walter Rodney Foundation.
Oh, okay.
So she's the CEO of that organization, and they have conversations like these. She joins podcasts. I actually was able to watch an interview. I think there was a podcast interview with her. So I learned a lot about her. I learned a lot about Walter Rodney and just how their life evolved with kids and even also, you know, when he started to get banned to
Mm,
travel and how that affected his livelihood. It also talked about, of course, like his studies, where he went to study, and he studied African studies.
yeah.
So he became an expert. And I think that's what I love about his story is that he became an expert and then connected with the people with the information and learning. So it was like an even exchange. So they, you know, it talks about in here how he traveled and people felt well learned from him
Yeah.
of their African truth, so to speak. So it's a beautiful book. It's a very short book, but it's very powerful.
Mm,
It tackles a lot of issues. So it gets into issues. They talk a lot about um, basically racism and political structures. He references Frantz Fanon a couple of times,
yeah.
the author. So, and it talks about, you know, more of the African struggle. It talks about the Caribbean struggle very briefly, but there's history and his life story kind of unfolds in this book. So it
Yeah.
makes it relatable and it gives you something to take away from it, especially if you're social, especially if you are well read, or at least you want to share with people. It is definitely the green light to do so.
Yeah. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed his other book, so I'm sure that this is just more value added to his canon. Um, so it sounds very interesting. You're actually convincing me to pick up the book myself
Oh, yeah.
and get to
And
know.
I have How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, and I'm going to add that into my book stack because
Yeah,
I do have several to read, but I'm definitely reading that book,
yeah.
and I cannot wait to discuss that book with you as well.
No, I think we're gonna post a podcast soon on how Europe underdeveloped Africa. We recorded it this past weekend, and
Yay.
that conversation was phenomenal.
Mm,
Walter sophisticated my view, my economic and political view of the world. He
I
kind of
see. I
just
see.
he took it up a notch, right?
I see. I see.
He made a lot of things clear. Um, I started to understand more the tenets of socialism. I started to understand. Well, reading that book, you have to go into Marxism, right?
I see. I see.
And you have to learn about all of that. Go all the way back to some of the ideas. Was it Che Guevara was sharing?
Yes.
You have to go all the way back there, and he has a. I think we take for granted people who have a holistic understanding of history. They kind of just
Mhm.
make it make sense for you without all the confusion. So he does very well at that.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
brilliant thinker. You said you brought a couple of books to show us. You have a text,
Yeah.
a little bit of a stack.
So there's another leader. So Stokely Carmichael is from the Caribbean, but he became his heritage is Caribbean. You can tell in his accent, but
Hmm.
he's an American, well, I won't even say American, that's not right, but American revolutionary. So he is another Pan-Africanist. He was very involved in the civil rights movement, and then he developed into a Pan-Africanist and very good speaker. Him and Walter Rodney have similar philosophies.
Yeah,
As a matter of fact, Stokely Carmichael references Walter Rodney, and a lot of like the Black Panther movement, that part of the civil rights story, reference Walter Rodney pretty regularly because at some point of learning at Black history, it
yeah,
leads to Pan-Africanism.
yeah,
Also, of course, mentioning Malcolm X and some other leaders that were able to travel abroad. They spent time traveling, and Stokely Carmichael spent time traveling. He went to the Caribbean, he went to Africa, and he gave speeches, he talked to people. So I wouldn't say the American version, but he is an American similar revolutionary in mindset and freedom and liberation
yeah.
philosophy as Walter Rodney. Mm-hmm. And let's see, I brought a couple other ones. Dr. Naeem Akbar is a African psychologist. I'm not sure if you're familiar.
I actually am
He
not.
is incredible, and he has a lot of research into self from the African perspective. I love his books. There's this one is one of my favorites, Know Thyself, and there's one called Light from Ancient Africa. Incredible read.
Mm.
And the final one I'll show you is The Miseducation of the Negro.
Oh my God.
Have you heard of this book?
I have. I've always wanted it.
It's incredible. I'm actually getting ready to read it in a group, like in a book club. So I'll definitely keep you posted. I've read it before, but we want to kind of revisit it and discuss it. Um, and I'm happy to do that again. Dialoguing and having these discussions is like key to learning our way
Yeah.
into enlightenment and out of colonialism. And then I just will briefly show you the book that I wrote
Oh, wow.
about self-discovery. So along my journey of reading or just getting a little familiar with knowledge of self, it led me to write this book. So I just wanted to briefly introduce that since we're
Can you please show
talking
it again so I can take a screenshot?
about. Absolutely.
There we go. This is so cool. I got it.
Wonderful.
Wow. That's incredible. That's incredible that you've written a book, first of all. Um, that's one of my aspirations. Funny enough, the book that I'm working on, the working title is The Miseducation of Christopher de Bella, kind of inspired by titles like The Miseducation of the
I
Negro,
see. I
Miseducation of
like
Lauryn
that.
Hill, right? Her
Yes,
album. And in that same tradition, I'm writing a book from my perspective as a South African growing up.
I love that.
Like I said, I was radical from a young age. So it's going to speak to some of my thoughts going through school and then growing up
I
to
can't
becoming
wait for
myself.
it. I know it's going to be incredible.
Yeah, I believe so too. So, is there a soft copy version of your book that's available
I
for
only
purchase?
have hard copies. I don't have ebooks. I don't
Yeah,
have that just yet. But that is coming.
yeah,
Because right now I'm using it to connect with people physically.
yeah.
But I haven't created the electronic version just yet.
Okay, but congratulations. That's an amazing
Ooh,
feat. And since you were so kind and gracious to share a book stack, mine is not as mine's just 3 books, but I did bring along books to show you as well.
yay.
You might have already run into this one. Okay, first I need to unblur my screen, right? It's just gonna blur my books. I'll do that for here.
Okay.
This book, This is called Things Fall Apart by an author named Chinua Achebe.
Oh my goodness.
100%. We have a podcast on this as well already.
Okay, I'm gonna check it out. I have that in a trilogy. I need to read it. Thank you for bringing that
100%.
up.
Yeah.
That's yeah.
We have a podcast on it. It's brilliant, brilliant book. It's one of, what's significant about it is it's one of the first times, if not the first time, an African wrote about African history from an African perspective. So before that, before he wrote this book, before China wrote this book, books on Africa were, books on Africa that were written in English were all from a colonial perspective, from a Eurocentric perspective.
Wow.
This book is literally the fundamentals of things that come after it, because for the first time we got to understand African values. He got to explain certain things, what were going on in the tribe, our sayings, our axioms, our cultures, our ambitions. He's one of the first writers in English to prolifically describe that, and bring to light what African culture is really about. Things Fall Apart, Chinua Achebe. Part of the storyline is what happens pre-colonialism, and then the Europeans arrive on his shores and begin to colonize them. It's just, even if you listen to it, it's a phenomenal story. It's one of the best books you'll ever read in your life. It follows.
I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah, it follows I think a tribe, a boy named, what was his name? Oh, how can I forget his name? Onkonko, I think. And his life in the tribe, what it was like being the tribe, and it's real. I describe his writing. If you think about like a Kendrick Lamar, it's the same.
Oh wow!
So it's real. You get to know the good, the bad. It's not watered down. He's abusive to his wife. He has many wives, and this is all happening in the tribe, but he has ambitions, and there's a reason why he behaves the way he behaves. In his culture, being weak was looked down upon, and Chino gives the context, and his dad never really made it, so he had this anger inside of him. It makes things that would appear normally savage very human, just very like, this is stuff we'd all go through if we were in a situation. And then the colonials arrive, and he speaks about his thoughts about what's happening in his village as they're setting up churches, and it's just an incredible book. And then there's this gem of a book. It's called Indaba, My Children, which means, well, Indaba means the news or the state of affairs, my children.
Okay.
It's basically the news. And it's by the shaman that I was telling you about, Credo Mutwa. So he wrote a book called Indaba, My Children, African Tribal History, Legends, Customs, and Religious Beliefs.
Wow.
Now, this book is about 600 pages long.
I'm okay with that.
With small text.
That's exciting to me. I love books like that.
It's a monster of a book. It's I mean, not just the size of the book, but the content, right?
Oh, wow.
This guy he goes all the way to describing how in some of our historic tales, ancient alien civilizations came and interacted with African people and shared.
I believe it.
It's just unbelievable, right? It's like, it's the deep end. This is the deep end.
Okay, I want to go there. I want to go there.
This right here is the deep end. He shares some of our connections, just a lot of things. He brought a lot of things to us to light. Our connections with the rest of the continent comes up, who we are, where we actually come from, because we are stuck in our colonial identity. So I say I'm South African, and the person living in the country north of me is Zimbabwean. So now they've developed a whole different personality, a whole different culture, but we speak the same language. There's languages that we share in common, and we were once the same people. So the colonialists literally just divided us, and now we see each other as different people. And we've adopted the identity of our nation states, right, without ever observing them, without ever observing statism. So he breaks those boundaries to show us that we're all one people,
That's
and
amazing.
the philosophy is there, the the spirituality is there.
Okay.
Um,
That's
Lots of myths,
exciting.
a lot of things to dive into. And then
Okay.
finally, this book right here, I told you about this man. It says,
Mhm.
I Write What I Like
That's it.
by Steve Biko.
Okay.
Um, Probably one of the most cerebral thinkers, very, very, very sophisticated in his understanding of Pan-Africanist movement, Black consciousness movement,
Love that. Okay.
heavily academic, just a genius in all sense of the word. He's an icon here. We make songs about him. He's a liberation icon. He was killed for his beliefs, which immortalized him. I just want to show, like, for example, I have a part here that I've flagged. I'll read just a couple of seconds. For a couple of seconds, I'll read some of the things that he said, right?
Thank you.
So, I mean, he says here, and I'll switch back on my blur. He says, does this mean that I'm against integration? If by integration you understand a breakthrough, if by integration you understand a breakthrough into white society by Blacks, an assimilation and acceptance of Blacks into an already established set of norms and code and behavior set up and maintained by whites, then yes, I'm against it. I am against the superior, inferior, white-black stratification that makes the white a perpetual teacher and the black a perpetual pupil, and a poor one at that. I'm against the intellectual arrogance of white people that make them believe that white leadership is the sine qua non in this country, and that whites are divinely appointed pace setters in progress. I'm against the fact that a settler minority should impose their entire system of values on an indigenous people. If, on the other hand, by integration you mean there shall be free participation by all members of society, catering for the full expression of the self in a freely changing society as determined by the will of the people, then I am with you. For I cannot escape the fact that culture, shared by the majority group in any given society, ultimately determines the broad direction taken um, taken by a joint culture of that society. So that's how he used to speak. And any page you open, he sends shivers down your spine. Especially when you think about the context he was saying these things in. It was like a black life was not valued at all. You get killed, which he did, for just saying stuff like this, you know? So phenomenal, foundational Steve Biko. I Write What I
Thank
Like.
you so much. I'm really happy. My cheeks are hurting because I'm smiling so much because this is really great. Um, and none of these people, besides the first author that wrote Things Fall Apart, I do have his book, but the
Yeah,
other ones are brand new. I've never heard, especially, I'm really excited about The Shaman.
yeah,
I'm excited about learning about Steve Biko. I'm really excited because the parallels are amazing. They're beautiful, especially with Stokely Carmichael. And there are a couple of other leaders, of course, Walter Rodney, who were thinking along the same wavelength.
yeah,
And just being able to be in a space that's on that level. And it's not even that it's elevated or higher, it's so simple.
yeah.
I was able to go in a learn about spirituality from this lady here.
Mhm.
And she did a teaching at a cultural center here. And I asked her a question because when you start to learn about spirituality, it gets deep. And so you think you need to think at a higher level. You think, oh my
Yeah,
gosh, they have capacity to understand it. So I'm thinking higher level and capacity mean the same thing.
yeah,
And so I asked her that question. Do you think, in order to get the concept or understand the concept of African spirituality, that you have to be enlightened?
Yeah.
And believe it or not, she said no.
Oh, wow.
She said no. Her
Wow.
thought pattern is it's simple. You see
Mm.
it as you see it, you respect a being, you respect other beings.
Um,
And so it made, again, that was a big lesson for me because I love to be challenged. So I think I understand capacity. I'm a scientist, so I
yeah.
understand divinity. But so I'm thinking big, we have to think large. And then in
Yeah.
her context, she just said it's really simple, it's really not hard. And so that's what makes it beautiful to learn philosophy from these people because it's so simple.
Yeah.
It
It's
simplifies the whole picture.
it's very beautiful because I mean, at the same time as being simple, it's infinitely complex, right? So
Absolutely.
it's like a statement, like the statement, all is love. That's a simple statement, for
Yeah.
example. But
Mhm.
what does that mean, right? And what's beautiful is everybody can meet that statement wherever they are in their journey.
Absolutely.
So it does get complex.
Yes.
African
And
thought
that's
gets
the fun
insane.
part.
Yeah,
That's the fun part.
yeah. But once you have a grasp of the fundamentals, that grounding is important for you to be able to
1000%.
absorb all that electricity, right? All that energy. It needs to be grounded in something. Um,
Absolutely.
Otherwise, people go crazy. People go schizophrenic. You see it. They're not able to assimilate into culture and
Mhm.
social situations anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a beautiful journey, and it's really a shame. Well, it's not a shame, but I know there's still so much inside of you. There's still so much you'd probably like to share. There's so many questions I have. I mean, your whole aesthetic. You're wearing what, like 6 crystals on you right now, uh,
Yeah. Yeah,
right?
I am. Mhm.
You have still have the dreadlocks. I know there's just so much to your being, and there's so much to on my side as well. I've done this has been my
Absolutely.
whole life. This has been my whole life trying to rediscover who I am, what was my spirituality, what's going on in this life thing. I have crazy experiences that I've been through, right? Even spiritual experiences that have shaken my understanding of what this thing called reality is. And I'm sure you do have the same. And yeah, I feel like something special is happened here today. I really do. Just this
I
connection
agree.
across the world and then sharing literature. Um,
Yes.
the more we reflect on this day, the more I think
Same.
even as the journey unfolds, right? The more we look back to this seems like one of those peak moments in life. It's like,
It is.
hey, there was a time where I
Yes.
spoke to an American lady, and at first, it was just a conversation, but I would have never imagined what it would then become. So that's what I'm taking from this. And I don't know if you have anything
Yes.
else to say on that.
I'm humbled by the spirits. I'm humbled by the ancestors. I'm humbled by the creators.
Yeah,
Um, and I'm really looking for like the words, the terms that you gave me that meant God. And well, there was another term that you told me about. I wrote it down, but
yeah,
I'm thankful to that. Whatever that spirit is, all those who created
sharing.
you
Yeah,
find this, even just our friend Trey, I already told her thank you, but there was something more divine in whatever divine means, right? We're talking
yeah,
about constant terms, but whatever that embodies, I'm really happy and humbled about because it's people like us who are these, our ancestors embody. We embody the spirits because we're doing the same thing. And I think it's beautiful, especially groundings with my brothers. This was my first opportunity to even learn about internationalism. I had the pleasure to travel this winter. In December, I went to the Caribbean islands. So I got to visit, let me see, Martinique and Antigua and British Virgin Islands. And
oh
so
wow,
I was able to learn a little bit of history, but I was very surprised because I'm living in America. In America, they teach us that there aren't, we're it. There aren't any black people besides in Africa. And it goes to your comment earlier about black people being all over the world.
yeah,
So we to the Caribbean on a cruise. And it's so funny because the demographic is different. There are old people, young people, white people, people from all over the world on this cruise. We're all going to see black people. So
yeah,
And it didn't connect until I got there. Yes, we're going to vacation. The oceans are beautiful. The beaches are beautiful. But essentially, these are Black people.
Yeah.
So it made the teachings of internationalism and Pan-Africanism. So it brought it to life for me as an American because I felt connected. And I had really beautiful conversations with local people there, and each of that was an unforgettable experience. And it kind of brought to life the history of Pan-Africanism, and it validated what's happening between us right now. The discussions are probably going to be endless.
Yeah.
But even if I know we're going to talk again, but even if we don't, this moment is full of power and it's full of possibility and oneness between brothers and the creators. It's so beautiful. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Dr. Ashley Wade, you are incredible. You're incredible. I love your perspective. I'm left in awe. I'm going to think about this for a long time. I love how you synthesize information. I love how you understand it and you take it in. I love how grateful you are and are always acknowledging the forces that are conspiring to create certain moments for all of us.
Yeah.
I've learned a lot from you today as an African, and you definitely embody our spirit of humility, of humanness. I'm keep on keeping on. More people need to know about you. I'm blessed. This is a Wednesday morning for me. I'm going back to Massa after this, but Massa doesn't know I had my own little gathering, planning the
Same.
revolution in
Same. And
secret.
it's nighttime here, so I'm gonna get ready to go to bed, believe it or not. So
Yeah.
crazy.
We will reconvene. I'll upload all of this onto a drive.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And until next time, right?
Yeah, we'll talk very
We
soon.
must share love. Thank
Go
you.
with love. Thank you.